Will the Linux Foundation purchase Chrome from Google? Crazy idea. I know, a nutty idea. I must be hallucinating and on LSD to even propose such an idea. However, it kinda makes sense. I'm going to walk you through exactly why this might actually be something that occurs maybe during 2025, but I'm thinking more likely during early 2026. Walk through this with me, and reserve all judgment on my sanity until we get to the end. First, a little backstory here. The Department of Justice of the United States has sued Google, alleging that Google is a monopoly. Now, the Department of Justice won that court case. The judge ruled that yes, Google is a monopoly, and yes, Google must pay the price, right? That happened. What the Department of Justice, what their lawyers are asking for is a number of things, but the most critical piece of that, the biggest piece of that, is that Google must get rid of Chrome, right? That's a critical point in all this. If that doesn't happen, I don't know that the DOJ or their lawyers will be happy. So that's been proposed. That's been put out there. That hasn't been ruled on yet, but that's been put forward by the prosecution. Now, Google has a few options here. Realistically, they have three real options. The first is that they hope for a lenient remedy. Now, basically, the idea here is that over the next few months, the judge in the case will rule on what the remedy to Google's antitrust violations should be. Now, it could be as simple as a slap on the wrist. It could be you have to sell off Chrome and Android and a bunch of other things. It could be a variety of different remedies. Google could hope for a good remedy. The second option that Google has is a successful appeal. Google is obviously going to appeal this ruling. That was never in doubt, right? So that's the other option. And they have to hope that they're successful in their appeal, which they might be or they might not be. But there's a big gamble there. The third real big option that Google has in dealing with all of this is planning for the worst case scenario remedy, right? Plan for what happens if and when the judge rules that Google must sell Chrome. Figure out how to finagle that so it all works out okay for Google in the end. Now, if you're Google, you're going to plan for all of these eventualities. But what's strange here is Google does not seem to be planning for the first eventuality, the hoping for a lenient remedy. So how this works is this. The plaintiffs, right, the prosecution, they supplied to the judge a document which listed out what they thought should happen to Google, what the remedies should be. And it included proposals like selling Chrome off so Google had no control of Chrome anymore, right? That was one of the proposed things. Now, Google had an opportunity in December to counter that proposal. They got to publish a document with the court that says, hey, court, I know we've done wrong. I know Google screwed up. My bad, boo. But here's how we can make it right. Here's how we can make amends. Here's the remedy that we think would be the most effective at righting our egregious wrongs, right? Google had that opportunity to do so, and it was insane. It was absolutely nuts. This came out on, what was the date here? December 20th, they published this court case. They slipped it in right before Christmas, right? And kind of hoping no one would notice it. And what Google suggested to the judge was essentially, you know what? This will all be better if we file our forms in triplicate. Now, you didn't hear that wrong. Essentially, what Google did is they said, we'll do a lot more paperwork, but keep doing the same business that we just got found guilty of for antitrust violations. We'll still do the same exact things, but we'll file more paperwork about it. Twice, maybe even 3 times as much paperwork, and it'll all be better now. That was what Google suggested to the judge. Now, there's not a snowball chance in hell, based on the readings of the rulings of this judge and what the prosecution has written and what's been ruled so far. There's no way this judge is going to go for any of that. This was basically Google flipping the double bird to the judge. That's what this was, right? They had to, before they could appeal this case, file something. This was part of the procedures. They had to file their counter for the remedy. They had to file something, but this is what they did. But they're clearly Google has no intention of getting a good remedy, a lenient remedy on this. They know that. So that's not an option, which means the two remaining options clearly that Google is actually considering are a successful appeal and planning for the worst case remedy. Those are the two options on the table here. But here's the thing. The odds of a successful appeal in this case are low. Now I need to preface this because there is precedent for similar antitrust appeals having some level of success after the remedy phase is instituted. A lot of you may remember the Microsoft antitrust case. It was a big friggin' deal, right? Right near the turn of the millennium, Microsoft was decided that it was ruled that they were a monopoly. They were in violation of antitrust laws. There was talk of breaking them up into a bunch of little mini Microsofts and all sorts of things. And that didn't really happen. What ended up happening was a much, much more lenient remedy, which ultimately did happen through a series of appeals. However, looking through the specifics of this case and knowing that there are more similar cases already on the court docket in the coming months, the odds of a successful appeal to both this case and the upcoming cases seems low. Just if you read through the documents, it's hard to envision how Google has a extraordinarily successful appeal. That doesn't mean it's not possible. It's obviously possible that they win on appeal. It depends on the judge they get. It depends on the state of the industry at the moment. It depends on a lot of factors. But it doesn't seem overly likely. At the very least, there is a strong chance that Google loses that appeal. It's a roll of the dice, which means that Google can't count on that, right? They can't assume that and plan for a good appeal. So the only thing that Google can control completely is planning for a worst case scenario remedy. That's the only thing that they can actually control. So what seems to be happening is Google is pushing forward with an obvious appeal because, hey, why not roll the dice, right? Even if there's a 5% chance of winning the appeal, you roll that dice. Google is a cash cow through the advertising systems, and Google, Chrome is a cash cow for Google through the advertising systems, and they don't want to give that up. So you plan for the worst case and you roll the dice on the appeal. So here's the question. Here's the burning question for Google. If Google is forced to sell Chrome, how can Google retain as much control as possible of Chrome? Right? If they have to sell it off, they don't want to lose control of it entirely, right? It's already not a great deal for them if they have to sell it off. That's going to have an impact on their business in a big way. The more control they can have over it, when all the dust settles, the better for Google, whatever that control may mean. Now, what form does that take? Well, a couple of days ago, Google kind of tipped their hand as to one, at least, of their strategies in this regard. The Linux Foundation announced a supporters of Chromium-based browsers organization, a sort of a sub-foundation of the Linux Foundation. And it was put together by Google, primarily by Google, with support from Microsoft and Meta. Interesting. Interesting that this would happen, and interesting the timing of it. Now realistically, there are multiple reasons why Google is clearly doing this right now. One reason that has nothing necessarily to do with this court case is something called open washing. Basically coming out and making a big show about supporting open source and open source organizations and open source licensing and methodologies and the like, above and beyond what they had done thus far. It's a way of garnering interest, attention, good press, good feelings, good market, and potentially working with other organizations on your product, even though maybe you weren't the most 100% supportive of open source in certain ways before, right? That's kind of what it seems like it could be happening here with the supporters of Chromium-based browsers organizations. However, and this is critical here, let's walk through this. The Linux Foundation is controlled entirely by the funding of the companies that are involved in it, the member companies. Companies like Microsoft, Intel, Meta, Huawei, Oracle, Google, and on and on and on. In fact, many companies like Meta and Microsoft pay a huge amount of money for a seat on the board of directors of the Linux Foundation. And for the Linux Foundation, in a very real way, it is pay for play. It is, you pay a certain amount, a very large amount, $500,000 there, $1 million there, etc., and you get a seat on the board of directors, and you can control what the overall foundation does, which gives you a lot of control over the Linux kernel and various other sub-foundations, of which the Linux Foundation has a mountain of them. Very few of them have anything to do with Linux. So it is more of a open source-ish trade organization where individual member companies can exert control over certain projects, certain IP, and other companies at the same time. So let's think about this here. Well, what could potentially happen? What could they be actually setting up to happen here? Here's what I think. Now, I could be wrong on this, but my predictions along these lines have a pretty strong track record, even when everyone tells me I'm wildly wrong. So go with me on this for a minute. First, I think Google is going to purposefully stay off the board of the Linux Foundation. Right? Now, currently, Google pays a lot of money to have certain amount of influence and control over the Linux Foundation, but they do not. They stop just short, just tiny bit short of paying enough and pushing forward to have a seat at the board table, which means that they don't have control, but they have control through the purse strings. You see here? That's specifically setting it up so Google is not controlling the Linux Foundation, wink, wink. It's very critical. That's a critical point here. The second is the courts will eventually force the sale of Chrome. I think that is the likely outcome. Is it for sure? No, but I think it is likely. I think that come this next spring, the judge will, or this next summer, I mean, the judge will rule that Chrome must be sold off. I think that Google will attempt to appeal, which will kick the can further down the road. And depending on how that case gets expedited, eventually the courts will say, no more appeal. We're done with this. Google sell Chrome, right? The supporters of Chrome will exist. It will be this predefined multi-corporation organization foundation that can present itself to the courts as a viable candidate for purchasing Chrome from Google, because they can say, oh, this would be taking it off of Google's hands, because look at who is controlling the Linux Foundation. It's Microsoft, it's Meta, it's some of Google's chief competitors. So let's put Chrome into the supporters of Chrome Foundation. Right? Now, Google, at which point, will maintain the dominant position within that organization, which it already has. It is the instigator and the dominant presence within the supporters of Chromium-based browsers organization within the Linux Foundation. And I think at that point, because of their massive amount of financial support of the Linux Foundation, they will continue to drive and control a significant interest in the future of Chrome, even though they don't technically own it anymore. Here's the thing, it's not ideal for Google. This is not an ideal scenario for Google, but it is the best remaining option. If they are forced to sell it, what's better? Have it inside of a foundation that they have a dominant lion's share of control over, or have Microsoft or someone own it outright and Google no longer has any say whatsoever in its future direction, right? So the best remaining option may not be an ideal one, but it is a viable path forward. And I believe that Google is pursuing this path. Now, I should point out that I have spoken with individuals with inside Google and with inside the Chrome organization, and it has been confirmed to me that this general line of thinking has been discussed. I do not have concrete details to share, unfortunately. I do not have any sort of concrete verification that it has been rubber stamped from the executive line saying, yes, this is a strategy we will pursue. But I can confirm that this line of thinking has been discussed within the Chrome organization inside of Google. Now, when the supporters of Chromium-based browsers organization was created, they reached out to a wide variety of developers, organizations, and companies that are heavily involved in building Chromium-based browsers. And one of those individuals involved was Brendan Eich. Now, Brendan Eich is an absolute legend. He is the creator of the JavaScript programming language. He was the one-time CEO of Mozilla before things went weird at Mozilla, and he's the founder and CEO of Brave, the Brave web browser. So they reached out to Brave, which is based on Chromium. And, I floated this theory by Brendan. My theory about the Linux Foundation ultimately gaining control in a way of Chrome. And he had this to say, quote, "This Samsung-free front group is not to own Chrome as a spin-out. Forces inside Google made this clear, but it's obvious. It seems garden variety, pay-to-play, open washing." End quote. And so he makes a couple of interesting points there. The first is that Samsung is not involved in the supporters of Chromium-based browsers organization. Samsung is not there at all, despite the fact that Samsung is a platinum top-level supporter of the Linux Foundation already, which is curious that they didn't want anything to do with this new organization. And Brave declined to be involved with it as well, because realistically they had to pay a huge amount of money to have any viable seat at the table for this new supporters of Chrome organization within the Linux Foundation, and Brave just wasn't interested in that because that was ridiculous for them. He went on to say, quote, "Microsoft might want this, indeed, but funding will still be tough, and multi-funder pay-to-play governance stinks in all my life's experience. No Samsung, and Igalia also smell." So Igalia is a consulting organization that focuses on web browser stuff, and they've done a ton of things related to VR and Firefox and Chrome and Chromium. They're a consulting firm out of, I think, Spain, and they do a ton of browsing work. And if you were going to have an organization that was really driven by the developers of Chromium, you would have both Samsung and Igalia, and realistically even Brave, involved with that. But that's not what's happening here with the supporters of Chromium-based browsers organization. He goes on to say, quote, "Remember when Microsoft was being broken up? Did not happen. The appellate court kicked it back. Settlement without breakup," end quote. And that's what we referred to before. It is entirely possible that it goes down that road. However, I genuinely, just looking at the court documents so far and the judge's ruling to date, this does not seem like the likely course. And even if a successful appeal and a much smaller slap on the wrist sort of fine system or fine penalty is how this ends up shaking out in the years ahead, that's a gamble. That's a big gamble for Google, and you want to have a plan B, even if that plan B kind of sucks. It's still better than no plan B at all. So I genuinely think that at some level, at least at Google, they're thinking this through, even if they're not admitting it when they talk to everybody else. So here's what happens next. Here's where we go from here. First, we've got the United States Department of Justice versus Google. That's the trial we're talking about right now. It goes to remedy trial in April, the end of April 2025. So, in the next couple of months. The judge is currently slated to rule on that remedy phase of the trial in August of this year. So we've got to wait until August. We have 8 months to wait on that. So we've got a ways to go before that kicks in. However, things are getting a little bit more complicated because an incredibly similar case is being also filed against Google by the state of Texas, which kicks off and goes to trial in March of this year. And all of these are going to be happening at the same time. And considering the venue of the Texas versus Google lawsuit, the judges that looks like they're going to probably be involved with it, and the fact that a lot of the details are real similar to the DOJ case and the laws haven't changed, it's difficult to imagine an outcome from Texas v. Google that is anything other than Google is a monopoly. They are in violation of antitrust laws, both at the federal level and at the state level within Texas. And this needs to move to a remedy phase. And we're going to look at breaking up Google, which means Google is going to be having several appeals to try and keep themselves from getting broken up into mini Googles. The odds of them dodging every single one of those cases and winning every single appeal, considering how quickly these cases are coming up, it just does not seem likely. It just doesn't seem likely. But we're gonna watch it. I mean, it is possible. But I would bet money. I'd put $100 down on Google is going to have to sell off Chrome. Just based purely on the various court cases that are going right now, the odds of an appeal and the like, and how Google is acting. Clearly, Google internally, they know there's a good chance they're going to have to sell off Chrome. And I think they're planning for it. And I think their backup plan is the Linux Foundation, as crazy as it may sound. Thank you to the Lunduke Journal subscribers over at lunduke.com. You can find all the different things there to watch and listen to the show on a wide variety of different platforms. And if you work for any of these big tech companies and you've seen something funky and you want to become a whistleblower, click on the Become a Tech Whistleblower link at lunduke.com and you can get a hold of me. We can do so anonymously. I can keep your identity a super secret. I have never leaked the secret of any whistleblower who has leaked any material to the Lunduke Journal, which has been substantial over the last year or so. If you want to leak some stuff, feel leaky, I can help you feel leaky. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, nerds and nerdettes across the inner tubes, I do declare, end broadcast.